The Deposition of Elizabeth Hubbard versus Sarah Good, March 1st, 1692. I saw the apparition of Sarah Good, who did most grievously afflict me by pinching and pricking me, and so she continued hurting of me till the first day of March, being the day of her examination, and then she did also most grievously afflict and torture me, also during the time of her examination, and also several times since. She hath afflicted me and urged me to write in her book. This is The Thing About Salem, and I'm Josh Hutchinson.
I'm Sarah Jack, and it's been proposed that our ancestors' accusers suffered from convulsive ergotism, and that's a theory used to explain afflictions and visions from the court deposition Josh just read.
Convulsive ergotism is ergot poisoning from extended exposure to the ergot fungus. And the scientific name for ergot is Claviceps purpurea, which means purple clubhead, based on the appearance.
It affects rye and other cereal grains, but largely rye. Ergotism is horrible, and it's painful and destructive to human health. It's also known as St. Anthony's fire.
There are two forms of ergotism, convulsive and gangrenous. The convulsive is what's been alleged in Salem because none of the records report any gangrene in any of the afflicted persons. And convulsive ergotism is more likely to occur in children.
Whoa, but let's back up a minute. What happened before the Salem witch trials? Other witch trials.
Yeah, we really have to keep that in mind here because you can't understand Salem by looking at it in isolation. You don't know where these things came from. It seems like everything was invented from whole cloth in the spur of the moment.
So with that in mind, let's take our first look at the ergot hypothesis.
Yeah, the symptoms of convulsive ergotism include painful convulsions followed by a heavy appetite, spasms, permanent shortening and hardening of the hands or feet, which is the result of the spasms, a livid skin color, so purplish or dark blue like a bruise, sensations of heat and cold in the extremities, diarrhea, nausea, and vomiting, tingling, prickling, or numbness, itching, reproductive complications, mania or psychosis, headaches, death in severe cases, dementia, and perceptual disturbances.
One of the critics of this theory around the Salem series of accusations and afflictions points out that ergotism is a constellation of symptoms.
It's important to remember that because to establish that ergotism was present in Salem in 1692, you have to establish that individual patients had all or most of the symptoms because they occurred together. Symptoms we know that they didn't have were those of the gangrenous ergotism, which were peeling skin, weak peripheral pulses, loss of peripheral sensation, edema, the death and loss of affected tissues.
Just over 49 years ago, Science magazine published an article, Ergotism, the Satan Loosed in Salem.
That article, written by Linda R. Caparel, was the article that established the case for convulsive ergotism. This was rebutted. An argument came out against this the same year, 1976, on December 24th. The same publication, Science Magazine, published an article called Ergotism and the Salem Village Witch Trials by Nicholas P. Spanos and Jack Gottlieb.
Then in the 80s, another scientist wanted to jump in on Linda Caparel's fun, and she published an article called Views, Ergot and the Salem Witchcraft Affair. Her name was Mary Matosian.
Yeah, that article in 1982 was then rebutted a year later by Nicholas P. Spanos, came back with a longer article than his initial rebuttal. An article called Ergotism and the Salem Witch Panic was published in October 1983 by the Journal of the History of Behavioral Sciences, and really is a very good article to read because he makes the case against ergotism, and he also makes the case for a more reasonable explanation of the Salem witch trials, which is that socioeconomic factors in the region, tensions and stresses, really played a greater role than any kind of actual illness.
One of the things that I love about this timeline of argument about the ergot theory is none of these are historians first. None of them. You've got psychology and physiology taking a look at the Salem witch trials. And those are important aspects of understanding why we mistreat people, why we hunt witches, why we have health issues, why we have afflictions.
These articles, as thorough as the Spanos rebuttal was, they weren't the last word on ergotism and Salem Village. It's still being written about today, is featured in a lot of television shows about the Salem witch trials, documentaries, pick it up, magazines purporting to be scientific, pick it up, all kinds of publications.
Podcasts, pick it up.
Podcasts, pick it up. I saw the other day the USDA has the Salem witch trials on their ergot page. It's just pervasive in society, but we're about to list all the reasons, or the chief reasons, why it couldn't have been ergot that caused the Salem witch trials.
Which were not the first witch trials. I just like to keep pointing that out, that we have years and decades and centuries and story after story of courts with accused witches in them.
Yeah, in fact, we had a very similar case in Massachusetts in 1688. It's happened less than 4 years before the afflictions took hold in Salem Village, and the afflicted children presented many of the same behaviors and symptoms and described many of the same types of spectral sights.
Why can't it be ergot?
Well, one thing is that convulsive ergotism does not occur in individuals with adequate vitamin A intake. And vitamin A is found in fish and dairy products. We know Salem Village was a big farming community. There were other big farming communities in the area. Salem town was a huge center for fishing operations, and so were other towns on Cape Ann. And so these individuals had a healthy supply of dairy and fish. Another reason that it's unlikely that ergotism caused the Salem witch trials is that families did not develop the symptoms. So, for instance, in the first household, the Samuel Paris household, where the affliction started, 2 girls, Betty Paris and Abigail Williams, became afflicted, but the other 2 children in the household did not. None of the grown-ups in the household became afflicted. So it's very unlikely, because they would have all been eating the same bread and they would have shown some signs, especially the youngest child would have been very susceptible to this.
Yeah, the inconsistent symptoms tell a lot. And these experts were looking, they went to the court documents. Like, we go to the court documents. You should go to the court documents when you're trying to understand a story. And there, in these court documents, there's no diarrhea or vomiting. 3 afflicted girls did complain of GI discomfort, but each only complained of this once out of many times they complained.
Yeah, and there were no reports of the livid color that you'd expect on the skin of the afflicted, and none reported cold feelings in their extremities at all. Only 2 referred to burning sensations, and those were both triggered by external stimuli. One was when a poppet was burned, and the girl referred to feeling burned, and the other was when a girl's fingers brushed the hood of an accused person, and she said, "Ouch, that burned me." So take
Yeah.
those with a grain of salt.
Yeah. And one of the things we know from looking at the court appearances and what was happening during the examinations, that community was highly relying on cues because they wanted to see, were witches afflicting? And so these accusers and afflicted, they would respond to words or movements of an accused person. So these symptoms are starting and stopping. They were totally responding to the social situation. They weren't just out of control, ill afflictions. They were in response to social cues.
That's
Brings me back to the Goodwin children, how it's noted in the record by Reverend Cotton Mather that when it was time to eat or to relax, those Goodwins felt great. It was when they had responsibility or work to do that their afflictions came out.
And, as Sarah mentioned, it's a constellation of symptoms. It's really a syndrome, the ergotism. We just want to point out that there wasn't a single person in the Salem witch trials records that had all of the symptoms of convulsive ergotism, or even the majority of the symptoms. So handpicking these symptoms that individuals had and trying to put those individuals together into one like mythical patient zero or whatever, it doesn't work. You can't just call individual accounts, put those together and say, oh, here's evidence that this was happening, because one person could have had a headache for one reason, and one person could have had pain in the bowels for a totally different reason. You don't add those 2 up and say, oh, they had both of these symptoms, so it must have been this. One thing that you can pick up in the records is that the girls' behaviors evolved and they adapted their behaviors as the proceedings went along. And another thing to look at is that in other English cases, there had been afflicted children that later came out and said, no, I wasn't really afflicted. I was faking the symptoms. So it is possible to fake the symptoms that were being behaved in Salem. The accusations, afflictions, and spectral visions spread beyond Salem to 24 other New England communities from Western Connecticut to down East Maine. So did all of these communities have the same bad rye with the ergot in it? And then all witch trials everywhere ended as abruptly as the Salem witch trials might seem to have ended. Actually, 3 women were convicted after spectral evidence had been ruled out.
If you've been listening to this podcast or to our other podcasts, The Thing About Witch Hunts, you are very familiar with not looking for that silver bullet to explain a witch hunt. We do not blame a single factor on complex societal events like witch hunts. We have the same troubles worrying our minds today as they did in 1692.